Well, good evening, everyone. This is awesome, I have to say at the beginning, to have an experiment like this and have the very first event and have such a great turnout. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. My name is Jim OARS. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School and Associate Provost for Research at Miami University. Just as a way of brief introduction, the genesis of this program came partially out of the fact that this is Miami's year of creativity and innovation. And within the Graduate School and Research Office, we kind of brainstormed on how could we participate in a meaningful way and highlight all of the great scholarship, research, and creative activity that our faculty do, but bring it in a way that connects us to the community and to the public. I'm a strong believer in having our faculty, what they do for the research, scholarship, and creative activities, really connect it at a public level, because that's how we make a difference in the world, by letting people know what we do. So what we did was we came up with several themes. Tonight's theme is called Decisions, Decisions, Decisions. And what we've tried to do is pull together three very different scholars who work on, in their areas, how people make decisions, or how what they do affects how people make decisions. So tonight we're going to see very short presentations on three different ways to think about how people make decisions. Our first speaker will be Dr. Joe Johnson. He's a professor in the Department of Psychology, and he works on areas of how people actually make decisions, especially when you have a quick choice to make. And then our second speaker will be Dr. Dennis Cheatham. He's a professor in the art department, and he looks at how art and design affects people's perceptions and how they might make decisions in areas like failure and end-of-life decisions. And then our third speaker will be Dr. Gillian Oakenfull. She's a professor in the marketing department, and her area of interest is in how people make choices, consumer choices, with an emphasis on the gay and lesbian consumer market, and we might find out that maybe there isn't one. So with that, I'll ask Joe to come up. We'll start the timer, and we'll get going.
All right, so again, thanks for the invitation to speak with you guys this evening. So I'm in the Department of Psychology, and so what I'm interested in is not just what people choose, but how they go about making those decisions. In particular, what I tell my students and research assistants, anybody who will listen, what I'm interested in looking at is what are the cognitive processes and some of the social processes that influence how people make decisions. The task you might see if you come into my lab as a participant in my research is something like this. And many of you guys, anybody who's done any shopping online, might have seen the screen similar to this if I'm in a market for a new tablet, right? But what I'm interested in is, again, how people go about making those decisions. So I don't care ultimately what they're going to end up choosing. What I'm interested in is what is going on, right, en route to making that ultimate decision. And the way that we do that in the lab is we use a number of different technologies. One of them, for example, is eye tracking. So we actually literally see what information people are accessing when they go about making this decision, and then we can make inferences about what attributes are important to them, what are the things they considered, and exactly how they went about weighing the different attributes on different options. So we might see something like this, where we can see people first are looking at price. When they ultimately choose something, if they're choosing Samsung here, then they're looking at the response box and these sorts of things, right? So that's what we do directly in my lab. So you might ask, okay, well, how is this informative, right? How can this affect what we do every day? How can it affect public policy and some of these other things, right? Well, in fact, the answer is quite a great deal, okay? And so a couple things I want to point out is in the UK, there's what they call their Behavioral Insights Team. And this is something that the Cameron government instituted in 2010. And their specific charge was to say, okay, what can we do in terms of taking what we know about behavioral science, decision research in particular, and apply that? How can we use that to affect and make some informed policy decisions based off of that? And a lot of this movement was spawned by a book by Dick Thaler and Sunstein called Nudge. This was published in 2008. And they covered a lot of ground in terms of how is it that we can structure choices? How is it that we can make the choices and the decisions that people are making anyway? And how is it that we can help people to make better choices? So it's not that we're telling them what to pick. It's not that we're making the choices for them. But simply, how can we structure either the environment or the choice options that they have, or anything else to help sort of lead them, or as the title of the book suggests, nudge them into making better decisions. Okay? And then so very quickly, our government got on board as well, And in 2014, actually, they developed the social and behavioral sciences team, okay? And this is advisory to the president. And about a month ago, and this made some buzz in the popular press as well, so you might have heard about this, Obama's executive order to use these behavioral science insights, to inform policy decisions and policy structuring, right? You might have heard about it more as Obama wants to conduct psychology experiments on the American people. Okay, that's how I heard about it in a couple outlets, right? Well, this is really what it was. This is saying the psychology experiments that are being done, how can we use this knowledge to help inform the types of decisions that we're making, right? A quote from this executive order, okay, and the way that I think this gets across very well, is that the programs that offer choices should carefully consider how the presentation and structure of these choices can most effectively promote public welfare. And that's really, I think, the application for decision research that's done in a psychology laboratory such as my own can really ultimately have an effect at, indeed, some of the highest levels. So what I want to talk about now for just a minute is what are some examples of this? How is it that we can structure choices? How is it that we can structure maybe the information that we're presenting to people to make those choices, right, to make better choices, or ones that are going to be in their own best interests, right, whether they know it or not. Okay, and I think there are several examples of this. Now the thing is, these are all going to have arguably very large financial implications as well, okay? Especially at the policy level. You can think about how something as small as what happens in my lab can ultimately then have some very large implications. Some of the applications for this sort of approach are best seen in looking at investment decisions. So this is probably one of the most popular examples from Thaler and Sunstein's book, where they talk about just how you structure this decision. In particular, I'm going to focus for a minute on what they call the default option, right? So a default option is, if you don't make a choice, this is what's going to happen to you, okay? And there's a lot of different default options out there. A default shipping speed when you do buy something online. I've got 4 kids. When I go and order a kid's meal, right? What is the default option for the side thing that comes with that? Is it the fries or is it the apples? Now this is a great example. If the default option is the apples, right, that's a healthier choice. That's going to lead to healthier kids, right? In my household at least. And so then the question is, well, if we make the default the French fries, okay, are people going to switch and elect to choose the apples? Versus if we make the default the apples, are they going to switch and elect to choose the French fries? And there's a lot of power in this default option. And that's what one of the key things that comes out of this book and a lot of these insights that are being applied in these policy settings, right, has learned in what they're really trying to apply. Whatever you make that default option is typically what people are going to do. People are very resistant to change. Sometimes people are just lazy. Okay? So whatever that default option is really has a lot of inertia, right, for what people are going to ultimately end up doing. And the examples for this that they give are in terms of things like 401k investments, right? So if the default is not to invest anything in a 401k, right, people are going to generally be undersaving for retirement. When they switched and they allowed people and made the default option such that people were indeed investing, even if it's a small amount, then what we see is investments in 401k and other retirement savings plans dramatically increases. And it's not just financial decisions either. There's some other very, I think, important and indeed life or death implications of some of this, right? Organ donation is another very good example of this, okay? And there's some very interesting research that I think has been summarized very well by Dan Goldstein and Eric Johnson in a recent science paper, okay? Where what we're showing here is the effective consent percentage. So this is essentially the rate, what we're showing here on the y-axis is the rate of, or the percentage of people who have given consent for organ donation in various countries along the bottom axis here. And you'll see some countries do very, very well, right? Near 100% of people who are consenting for organ donation after they die, right? And some countries are very, very low. And in fact, countries that are very demographically similar, Germany, 12%. Austria, near 100%, right? What's the vast difference, right, between these two neighboring countries, okay? So what is the difference between the countries that are labeled blue here and those that are labeled yellow? It's that default option. Okay, these blue countries are in a situation of what's called an opt-out policy. There, you're an organ donor unless you specifically say, no thanks, I don't want to donate my organs after I die. Okay? The countries in yellow, those have an opt-in policy. The default is not to donate your organs. Okay? So there you have to say specifically, I want to become an organ donor. So either the people in Austria are just that much more altruistic than the Germans, right? Or there is, again, a lot of power, right, and a lot of stickiness to this default option, right? And it can ultimately affect decisions. Is what some of this data suggests here, okay? Now there's other influences besides just these default options. So I've mentioned some of these things from a policy standpoint, right? There's also a very powerful social norm aspect to making decisions as well. Okay, Robert Cialdini is a social psychologist. He has a lot of research that I think is summarized and put forth very well in a 2003 paper that he has. And what he focuses on is conservation decisions, Okay? So are you going to throw your bath towel in the hotel room on the floor and get a new one the next day, or are you going to reuse it? Okay? Are you going to steal petrified wood out of the Painted Sands National Park, right? Or are you going to leave it for future generations to enjoy? And what he's found is, again, the very powerful notion here that these social norms can really affect these types of decisions. If you talk about the gallons of water that are wasted every day and the soap that's filling our streams and rivers, okay, people aren't going to be as likely to reuse that bath towel. If you tell them, you know what, 70% of guests that have stayed in this room have reused their bath towels, they're going to be much more likely to do so. If you say the consequences of stealing petrified wood out of the national park, right, and try and stress the negative consequences of that, sure, people might not do it, but if you tell them, hey, please don't do this, nobody else is doing it, okay, that is going to be a much more powerful message, is what a lot of Cialdini and his colleagues, their research shows. So it's not just the way that you structure a decision, okay, some of that structure and influence can also come from, again, the social norm. What do you think other people are doing? That can also be a very powerful influence on your decisions. Now, it can also be the case, right, that it's not necessarily always these external influences that are acting in on us when we're making our decisions, okay? But there are, I think, a lot of idiosyncratic things that we've learned, okay, that I've learned in particular in my lab looking at individual decision making. So what is it about one person and their thought process, and how can we describe how decisions are made for the everyday average person in any normal situation? And there's a few basic properties that I want to close with here to get you thinking about and think about how these things might affect some of the decisions you're making every day. Okay, the first of those, the economists will recognize this as diminishing marginal sensitivity. What that means for the rest of you, and I like to use this analogy to get this point across, if I take a candle and I light it, and I'm in a dark cave, you're going to know from 30 yards, 50 yards, 100 yards away that I've lit that candle in pitch black, right? And any of you who have been on a cave tour, right, in Kentucky or elsewhere, know this. When they light that candle, you see coming, and it's bright. If I go outside on a bright sunny day and I light that same candle, you're going to barely even notice that I've done it, okay? And so this is a property that people are very sensitive to, okay, is this notion of change. The amount of change that you see and that you experience, you're very sensitive to whether you have, for example, a very dark room or a very bright room, okay? In terms of something like value that you get out of something or money, okay, this is one of the few relationships in psychology that's actually elevated to the status of a law, okay, in terms of perception of a physical stimulus and the subjective perception of that in the mind. And the same goes true for things like money, value, okay, what we would call utility as a decision researcher. Okay? So to put this in concrete terms, $100 to pretty much anyone in this room, okay, is going to be very different than $100 to somebody like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. Right? If I were to win $100, sure, I'm going to be thrilled about that. The students in the room will be very thrilled about that. Warren Buffett, I mean, okay, he'll be happy, but he's made that much before. And the amount of time it takes you to tell him he's won $100, he's made a lot more than $100. Okay? Other examples as well, the way that you frame a decision really has a huge impact on the choices that people make. Okay? As an example of this, there's a very notorious example from Tversky and Kahneman. Okay? Kahneman, a 2002 Nobel Prize laureate in economics. Okay? And what they said is, okay, assume that there's this strange disease that's infected a lot of people. And you have a choice between two different programs that you want to implement in terms of trying to combat this disease. Okay? And what they found is that the way that you frame a decision like that, if you frame that in terms of the lives that you could save with such a program versus the lives that might be lost with such a program, people make very different decisions there as well. Okay? People are a lot more risk-seeking, okay, when they stand to lose something, and they're a little bit more risk-averse. They don't want to gamble as much. Okay? They don't want to take a risky proposition when they stand to gain something. So just the way you frame something like that as a gain or a loss can have a big impact as well. And you see a lot of this. A couple weeks ago we voted. And I don't know if any of you guys saw these issue 13 signs out there, but the tagline they had on there, it won't raise your taxes. Okay? They didn't say it also won't lower your taxes, right? They didn't talk about the fact that you weren't removing a tax that was already there. Okay? They're saying, no, look, it's not going to increase your taxes any. Okay? And that brings me to the final point, some stuff that we've done a lot of research in my lab, is in terms of a goal setting and reference points. Okay? So the other very powerful thing in individual decision making is, what are your reference points? And what I mean by a reference point is something like your current state, your status quo. If I'm currently paying a certain amount in taxes, I don't want those taxes to go up. So I'm going to be very sensitive to anything that's going to increase the amount of money that I need to pay in terms of tax levies or anything else. Okay? Now, there's other reference points that are very relevant as well that can affect decisions and behavior ultimately. Okay? Things like goals. If you're running a marathon, okay, then where you establish your goal for that marathon, okay, is going to affect a lot of things. It's going to affect how you run the race. It's also going to affect how you perform and the way you feel about either achieving that goal or not. Okay? And so it's not just your current status quo, which in terms of running a marathon might be the time you had in your last race, okay? But also these ultimate goals that you want to achieve. Okay? And the interesting thing here is if you look at the distribution of times, and this is based on like, I think close to 100,000 data points. George Wu and his colleagues at the University of Chicago, Booth School of Business, have collected this data. And this is the distribution of finishing times in 1 minute increments, okay, for finishers in vast variety of marathons all across the world. And what you'll notice is you can tell where people are setting their goals just on this distribution, right? Sure, there's this nice, normal, somewhat normal, positively skewed distribution here. But look at this, right at the 4 hour mark, right, at these finishing times, you see this huge spike, okay, huge spike at 3:30 and these other common intervals for the goals that people are setting. So you can tell, you can see the goals people set for themselves just on data like this and how powerful a goal can be as well. All right, so the properties, again, that I just want to reiterate at the individual level are this notion of sensitivity to change, okay? So it's not just how much you stand to gain or lose, but relative to how much you currently have, as well as things like goal setting can be a very powerful influence on decisions and decision behavior. It also explains to some degree why, okay, people derive different various satisfaction out of different events. So for example, how can somebody who wins a silver medal in the Olympics, right, not be nearly as ecstatic as somebody who wins a bronze medal? They did better. They got a silver medal, right? Why are they not necessarily as happy as somebody who got the bronze medal? Okay? And this is, again, this notion of relativity. Okay? Somebody who wins the silver medal, they're thinking, man, I missed out on the gold. I was this close to the gold. Somebody who gets the bronze medal is thinking, you know, I'm lucky to be up here at all. I was this close to not even getting a medal. Okay? And again, research has shown that you get better satisfaction out of an objectively worse event, i.e. a bronze over a silver medal, okay, based off of this notion of counterfactual thinking or comparative thinking. Okay? So this notion of relativity, I think, is one that really drives our decisions as well, and that's what some of my research shows. This thing shut off after like a minute, so I have no idea where I'm at on time, but if I haven't told you today, and I don't profess to have told you today, how to make better decisions, I hope at least I've given you a bit of an awareness about some of the factors, both inside the head and outside the head, that can influence those decisions, right? Maybe you'll be a little bit more aware of those, okay? Or C, when you're trying to decide which path to take, especially if somebody's trying to lean you or steer you down one path or the other. Okay? That's all I have. Hopefully I was close.
All right, so Dennis Cheatham, you're up. Also, I want to stand up at 10. Great.
Hi, I'm Dennis Cheatham from graphic design, and I also teach an experience design in our MFA here at Miami. I'm a design researcher, and some of that means I'm going to have to talk a bit about what the heck is design research. So to frame that, though, looking at what design is, there's 3 distinct parts to design. Not, man, it looks really good, and it looks really, really good, and that looks really, really good. It's more than that. And when we look at design, it's about 3 different parts. It's about a less desirable present. So in this case, the less desirable present is, we've got to bring water from one place to another. It's really heavy, it's really difficult. If I'm injured, I can't carry it. This is a less desirable present. Then we look at, wouldn't a future, more desirable, be better? So we're talking about projecting towards a future that's more desirable. In this case, it'd be great to have a well that's local so I can get water into my home, so I don't have to go back and forth to this water source. So here comes design. And design is an intervention. Design as intervention is positioned to change the current that is undesirable to a future that is more desirable. Notice I'm using a better, not using better, we're using more and less desirable, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So the hippo roller, what it's called, is the intervention that is trying to make a future more desirable possible. Now, design impacts us all the time. And when we think about cereal packaging, maybe the desirable is not really your desirable, it's somebody else's desirable. Like, we wish we could make more money off of toys that nobody's going to want anyway at the bottom of a box of one of these sugary things. But it's there, and that's where we see graphic design. Also with interaction design, it's an intervention. It's trying to change your direction. It's shaping and nudging your decision making. Just the form of the thing itself, the physical interaction design of the industrial design, or actually the interface itself. And then we also look at service design. Service design combining interiors and combining sequential actions. I need to go grab some oranges. Well, somebody's designed that interaction. Hopefully they thought it through well. This is an intervention. So with that, design intervenes. So it nudges us toward more desirable futures. Now ideally that future is something you actually want, but as we've seen, sometimes it's not. So being aware of what people are trying to nudge you into is an important step. Now, with all of this less desirable, more desirable, there's a lot of research that can be had. And that's where I'm living and that's where I'm working. Because the people who are deciding what these desirable futures are, the people who are impacted by them, the actual designs themselves, bring a lot of complexity. I mean, the designer who made this may not care a flip about you. They just may really like Gotham, the typeface. And so they're like, I'm going to design this using Gotham. And it's going to be great because I used Gotham. And they're not thinking about, can people read it from across the street? So lots of factors go into the design of things that are quite assumptive. So that's where research comes in to start to discern what's really happening in the less desirable. So design researchers going into a place to learn from the people themselves. So what is your less desirable? What are the challenges for you? What are your needs? Also, what is the more desirable according to those affected? Not the designer who's sitting there wanting to use Gotham, but what do the people really need? Where are the challenges? What is the well they wish they had near their community? And then also you have that design intervention itself. And my question is, when those affected are empowered to design the interventions, what would they create? Not somebody in some design studio making it, but the people themselves who are affected by the issue, the people who know best. So that work involves going into the field and doing work. This is a town in Oklahoma where they have a character campaign. They put these words up all over their community to try and build character. And some of the work we actually found in talking with community members, several people shared that they hated they were in Spanish because those people should go away, they don't belong here, which I never expected. But that's a social science approach to doing some of this research, the qualitative research of what's really going on. Working at Cook's Children's Hospital, I've spent nights and days there, studying in the pediatric intensive care unit. What are the challenges in that environment? And working with small business owners. Gathering that data, the qualitative data and field notes, interviews, and those observations that start to make up a grounded what's really going on. Reporting what's happening, and then ideally designing interventions with the people themselves that can affect change. So here's what I'm working on right now. Researching men and mental health counseling. So guys are resistant to attending counseling sessions. There's social norms there that's a weakness. You should not be going to those because you're less of a man. So the research involved engaging some of these men privately, but then also creating an instrument where they could respond freely and that it would be controlled through a website that I designed part of this project. And we discovered some things that I didn't quite expect. I was waiting for guys to say, okay, if my counseling session had beer, I would totally go. Or if I could do it, I don't know, while I'm playing pool, or if I could do it after I work out at the gym when it was convenient for me, I would go to counseling. That's not what the data showed. That's not at all what I expected. What came back was, I just wish I could see my friends more often. Those are the guys who help me out. And if I need to find a counselor, I'd trust a friend. So the research started out as, let's get guys into counseling sessions. But it turned into something unexpected. Friends as primary mental care physicians. They're the guys who actually are the canaries in the cave to sense what's going on with their buddy. Interventions that encourage and fuel deep, lasting friendships. So what came from this was the design of interventions or these critical probes that challenged guys. How would you get in touch with your friends more often? What's a way you would prefer? And the feedback started to develop some fascinating design outcomes, some interventions that could nudge those decision making. Also, a project I operated here at Miami University just last year, rewarding risk. So looking at failure and how do we encourage failure in our classrooms so learners can grow from failure. Because we grow when we blow something up and we go, what the heck happened there? and we start digging a little bit deeper. How can we encourage that kind of decision making? It was really fun in class, and actually I have one of my students here, for me to say, okay, I want you all to fail. And for them, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get an F, I'm hosed. It's not about that kind of failure. But what's fascinating about this approach is the fact that design has no correct answer. Just the most successful for the most people, that it's contextually based. But learners, when they were surveyed, responded, I want correct answers for solvable problems. I want to know exactly how to answer this properly. So we have two things that were not quite matching up. I'm teaching design where failure is actually the hallmark of iteration. And learners want the right answer. So how do we deal with that? What that turned into was an experiment operated with those students to let them decide what difficulty level they wanted to take on. It's like, okay, if success to you is growing your skills, which that's the feedback I got from the initial surveys and the initial research, then how about you choose how hard you want to go after a project? And actually more students, 70% of students chose something harder than what I would have selected for them, which actually worked out quite well. And they achieved. But it also has turned into growing and developing learning experiences that are extremely open-ended. So these slips of paper are the content of an assignment that I just finished operating with my students. It makes up a persona. I have no idea what they're going to make. I have no idea what they're going to design. You have to learn about who these people are, what matters to them, and figure out a persona that turns into outcomes I never expected. This person shot their own assignment. They did all the photography. I didn't ask them to do that. I didn't tell them to make a magazine. They built out something beyond what I asked. And so learners, when given room and when given no boxes to check, actually did more work than I'd ask. And they learned from it. Some of them failed miserably. And in my courses, I actually have a failure bonus now to incentivize failure and what can come from that. And I'm experimenting with that and bringing this same design research approach to the classroom. So with that, I've developed fist pump theory. And that is open-ended learning experiences. So learners grapple with ambiguity and drive their own learning achievements. The fist pump being, when you take on something really, really tough and you nail it, you're like, yes. So the more times learners did yes, the more they got really excited and the more they wanted to do. And that feedback and engaging that people group was consistent with what they showed in their work. So the work I'm doing right now is end-of-life decisions. And actually, Jennifer Heston is part of my team. She's in gerontology here at Miami. And we're looking at, we want people to talk about death, their own death, with their loved ones, and select a proxy and get the paperwork done. But we're also questioning what belongs in that group of end-of-life decisions, not assuming. Maybe what would matter to someone is, I want to make sure they get my couch, or when I can't speak for myself, could I have a note sent out to my brother to tell him I love him? These may be just as valuable to someone as knowing that their couch gets given away, or that they are disconnected from a machine that is keeping them alive. So we have to engage the people themselves. What matters to you? What's part of this group? And not assuming and gathering that data. And that's the work we're starting to do now. And we're focusing on underserved populations. We're looking in Hamilton, in Cincinnati, and then also up in Columbus. Of the people who are marginalized, who are not necessarily given access to a lawyer, where I can walk up and I can say, I need to write up my living will. It's just not in their vocabulary. So this kind of approach of decision making is trying to get someone to be in a vulnerable position, open themselves up to an intimate conversation. And some of the primary research we've been doing with key informants, with those individuals who've been working in this area, has started to reveal we really need to focus on that idea of intimacy and how we get people to be more vulnerable, because this is a scary place to be. One thing that's part of this research is people oftentimes talk about this when a loved one dies, when they have to set up these arrangements for their mother or for a brother who's passed on. Those discussions are already closed because those are a lot of vulnerability and fear. Decision making is not very open. And these individuals are stuck in a spot of like, well, okay, let's find out what hymn they liked, and I think they wanted to have this done, and there's a lot of guesswork. And that means that medical professionals also are put in a difficult position. How do we get this kind of conversation to happen early, at a time when it's controlled, when it can be about dignity? So it's about volunteer vulnerability, and that's what we're starting to look at in this project that I think is going to take the rest of my life, which sounds pretty exciting, because it's a fascinating problem of what is a less and a more desirable, and what interventions can happen. So with that, design is intervention. It's just a reminder that your decisions are oftentimes shaped by the things that are around us. And remember, design is something that is human-made. I don't think there's a natural thing in this room, except for us, right? So that means you're impacted every day by it. Remember, you've been nudged. Thank you.
So I'm Gillian Oakenfull. I'm a professor in the marketing department, and Jim has already given you a little bit of a spoiler about what I'm going to say. That's all right. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight, I've been here since 1998, and I am going to take you through a little bit of my research and then talk to you about the last piece of research that I'm going to do on this topic, because I'm basically blowing up everything that I've talked about in the past and doing that. So. LGBT, market or movement. So all of the research that I've done in this past has focused on the LGBT market. Usually the L and the G, but that's what we call it, LGBT. We throw them all in together. And so this is a little bit about the movement, right? And the movement really started in the 1950s and really sort of blew up in 1969 with Stonewall. So there were the Stonewall riots. And then the Gay Liberation Front came out of that, and that's when we started having gay pride parades. So that's when everybody started, sometimes in small little enclaves in San Francisco, and then they gradually moved a little bit in mainstream. So I came to this country in 1984. So I came from England to play college tennis, and the funny stuff in my accent is actually Irish, so that's all mixed up in there as well. And I came to Texas. Well, that's a whole other country. So I had 14 years in Texas. In the first year, my accent changed dramatically because they couldn't understand what I was saying. So this is about decisions. And the biggest decision I had to make around the 1990s was whether I was going to be gay. So when I say was I going to be gay, I don't believe it's a choice, but I do believe that I had a choice on whether I lived being gay or whether I didn't. And I was in Texas, so it really was a decision I had to make. So I decided when I interviewed at Miami, this was going to be my coming out. And so I interviewed here, and I interviewed openly gay, which was really the first time in my life that I did it. But if I was going to work somewhere and live somewhere, it was going to be all of me. And so when I came here, I started research on a very, very new area of the market, because in 1990s, the bastion of capitalism, the Wall Street Journal, had declared that there was a dream market, and it was gay people. And it was 1990 that this came out, and it was an era of AIDS activism. There were all this counterculture. Gays in the military is around the time of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So there was a lot of movement in either direction with this. There was a lot of negativity around it, but there was also this idea that somebody recognized that gay people had a lot of money, apparently. A lot of money. And you know, if there's money, forget that stuff, we're after the money. So there was this dream market that came up. But then you had this other subculture that did not want the corporate cultures coming in and taking over their own subculture, and there was this idea we wanted our gay ghettos, and we wanted our gay identity, and we wanted gay speak, and we wanted gay code, and we didn't want it all to be mainstream. So you had this tug between the two that was happening. So this was actually a sign that was up in the 1999 San Francisco Gay Pride. So there was this tug between the two, the movement and the corporate culture that was coming into it. So this was the era that I came into with this. So I got here in 1998. All of my previous research was on branding, and I decided I wanted to start working in this area. So there were two books that came out right as I came here, and the first was this top one up here, Gays, Lesbians, and Consumer Behavior. And just like a lot of firsts, it was awful. It was bad research, it was poorly done, the samples were terrible. And the samples were a big, big part of gay and lesbian research, because how do you reach them? In 1996, it wasn't easy, right? Because people weren't out. And so a lot of the research that was done really in this era were either convenience samples, so you had Stephen Cates, whose whole dissertation was based on the Toronto gay ghetto. I think he spent a lot of time there. But he had a book that was published from there, a lot of journals that were published from there, and a dissertation. But it meant that all we knew about that whole market and culture was very, very skewed. And when you're doing research, you have to think about the sample. Similarly, when you look at these, so this is really what was there at that time. So there was papers that talked about the difference between gay people and straight people, and your attitude towards homosexuality had an impact on how you reacted to ads. Very intuitive. I think my 3-year-old son could have looked at it and said, well, the straight people are going to like the straight ads, and the gay people are probably going to like the gay ads. And if you don't like gay people, you're probably not going to like the gay ads. That's where it was, really, with all of this. And also, the gay ads only had gay men in them. And one of the things, if you think about it and you were in that culture, there was a lot of research that had nothing to do with marketing that looked at people's attitudes towards gay people and found that they were far more negative towards gay men. And yet all of the research was looking at this and only using them as stimuli. So I wanted to have a bigger picture of all of this and start to look at it from a better perspective. So I started looking at gay people's attitudes towards gay and lesbian ads, straight people's attitudes towards gay and lesbian ads, and also looking at what they call coded ad. So in that era, the idea was if you could sort of slip it under the radar, so target gay people without getting the other people who were upset at Ellen and all those things, so those of you are old enough to remember that, the negative backlash that was happening in that time, somehow trying to avoid it. So there was also coded advertising. So I started to look at that. And actually one of my first papers, I'm not sure it would have a title like this, was called Lesbians, Lesbians, Lesbian. It's like location, location, location. I think I would have perhaps done something more nuanced now, but I was very much flying the flag at the time. But what I found was that people had a different attitude towards ads that had lesbians in them than gay males. And then there was the coded ad had a whole different thing there as well. And some people liked the coded because they thought it was an sort of inside joke. And other people felt like you weren't standing up for what you believed, right? You won't really speak to gays and lesbians, so you're going to stick a little rainbow in there, a little lavender, right? And that will appease us as we're going through it. So then I started to do a little bit more, and I started looking beyond advertising at product choice. And found things like if you look at gender identity, so some research had been done in the past that found that products actually have gender. So perfume is a female gender. This is, again, not very difficult, right? A car is male, right? So things are female and male. So I started to think about this when you think about gays and lesbians, because gender identity is very fluid, right? Well, it's fluid with all of us, but it's been really pointed out there. And was it that simple? Was it that simple that men would choose male gendered products and women would choose female gendered products? And I found that it wasn't. The more somebody had a strong gay identity, the more it actually flipped, and it became sort of interesting. So there's this gender flexing that was going on. So it wasn't that men were like, so it wasn't like straight women, it wasn't like gay women were like straight men, it was like gay women are like straight women and gay men. And straight men, they could flex across. So their gendering, it wasn't that they were less feminine, but it was that they could also be more masculine, right? So you could stretch across there. So those that talked about, the Freudian idea of inversion, it wasn't that, it was a flexing. You could really go either way with it. And I found that this happened with their choices of products as well, in terms of what they were doing. But if you look at advertising, and if you look now, it really hasn't changed that much. I did a content analysis and found that over 90% of ads that you see in gay media are gay males. Still that way now. And there are reasons why, but it's still that way. The other thing, if you notice, is that these really aren't speaking to any need. And I'm a marketer, right? There's no preferences. There's no consumer behavior here. It's all just about we're with you, right? So it's all just about, I'm glad you're out. Don't hide, the equality cake. It's all just about equal rights and we're in the fight for you, but it's not marketing. It's not speaking to people's needs. So I started to look at this and really think about it. But there are a lot of people that are this lady actually describes herself as a professional lesbian. I don't know what that means, but I saw this on her website. And she has the plan for you. If you want a marketing plan to reach the $830 billion LGBT market, she's got 6 CD discs that will get you there. So it's a big market, and there are lots of agencies that have touted this for years. They're mainly headed by a gay male, and they've talked about this $600 billion market, $800 billion market, and everybody's salivating around this. And I started to look at this, and I started to think about, is there really a market at all, right? Is there really an LGBT market? So one thing I started to look at was this idea that there are gay-friendly types of activities that you're here. I think maybe some of you, the younger ones of you, might be familiar with the HRC. So the HRC has an index. And the idea is that when gay people want to buy something, they look up the HRC index and see if this is a good company for them or not, right? So we flip through first and decide. Chick-fil-A, nobody has to flip through. Cracker Barrel, nobody eats there. But the rest, we might flip through and we might see, should we go there or not, right, as we're going through. So you're supposed to be looking at them and making moral decisions about whether they go through. And Palin Loza, who was one of the first people to look at that, she did a lot of work in the Hispanic market and then brought that thinking over to the gay market. This idea that we sort of lead with our buying power. So we support somebody in the marketplace because they support us in the social marketplace as well. So I did some research here on looking at how do people really evaluate what is gay friendly. People talked about gay friendly, but what does a company have to do to be gay friendly? And are some things more important than others? And I found that there were differences. So clearly offering a domestic partner benefits was more important. And I just want you to know, Miami was the first public university in Ohio that was to do this. People don't know that, and I'm quite proud of that. They also, so you'll see here, these are really the ones that affect somebody's welfare, right? So domestic partner benefits has a really big impact on me, far more than just advertising, right? So these were the ones that were here. And so there's nothing that much surprising there, except I also found there were pretty big gender differences on this. Gays and lesbians had different evaluations on this. The first thing being that lesbians in general felt all of these were more important than gay men. They also felt that all of these were more important except this one, advertising and gay media. There was no difference between gay men and gay lesbians on this, right? And I had a theory from my previous research on this, because remember I showed you that ad that had 93% of ads were males. The readership of what they call gay and lesbian media, pretty much the same thing. Lesbians don't read out, really. A small percentage do. They don't tend to read The Advocate. They tend to be gay men that are reading them, right? Not lesbians as you're there. Lesbians are used to seeing themselves represented in that. So they don't feel like gay media really represents them. If you don't see yourself in the advertising, then you wouldn't really feel it's important. Lesbians tend to read mainstream media, read Time, read Newsweek. And so that's why that has a far bigger impact on them than advertising in gay media. They won't be reading it, they don't see themselves there, they don't feel it's for them as they're going through. So these were really the ones that they felt were most important. So for example, has anybody seen this ad before, Subaru ad? They really jumped on this. So this idea, they had little license plates that had camp on it and different bits of code. The interesting thing about Subaru is they actually followed the market. Lesbians started driving Subarus and then they realized it. And then and then they started. Now it's the Prius, I think. So they followed the market there. They realized that lesbians had started to sort of select into this, and they actually followed it there as they're going through there. But this is the marketing part of this for me. So I did that, and I published it, and every PhD student that wants to publish in this area contacts me. And then I started to look at this, and I started to think, all of this is just bad marketing. Right? So I teach my students about how do you define a market segment, and we go through these 5 steps. And the first is that you have to be able to identify whether somebody is there. It has to be measurable, right? And so in the 1990s, that probably was a difficulty here. And there was articles published that said there is no gay and lesbian market because you don't know who is and who isn't. And that was probably the case then, but it certainly isn't now. We have the census, we have all of that detail. So it certainly is measurable. It's substantial, whether it's 3% or 10%, and it's becoming more and more fluid, right? It's certainly big enough to be called a market. The part where it becomes a little dicey is accessibility. As I told you, we don't read the same media. We tend to have very different habits, and so it's very, very difficult to reach them. But this last one, the idea of will they all act the same? So if there is an LGBT market, it means that all LGBT people act in the same way. Just really think about that. We make the same decisions because we're LGBTers, right? It's not just sexual orientation because we've got the B and the T. It's not just gender identity. But you're saying that they all make the same decisions and they're all as you go through. But this happened, right? And my theory is the thing that brought us all together was this, right? we had the same enemy. We were together. We were fighting for the same thing. It was a social movement that brought us together. We wanted marriage. We wanted anti-discrimination rights. We wanted this. The question is, what happens now that that's gone, right? So this was on The Advocate, and it said, gay is the new black, the last great civil rights struggle. I think there are many people in the room that would disagree with that, especially every female in the room, right, where you're getting praised. This is really symbolic of what is quite patriarchal about the gay and lesbian market as you're there. And this is why, right? Look at 2 lesbian households compared to, because you've got 2 female households that are there. So while there isn't an LGBT market, I absolutely agree that there is a gay male market, but I don't think there are separate markets within the others. I think if there were research done, which is what I'll be doing, is that lesbians and straight females are actually far more alike than they are like gay males. So I think the LGBT movement exists, but I think the LGBT market has always been a myth and a fallacy that a lot of people have gotten pretty rich on. Okay, thank you.
Now let's give everyone a round of applause. It was awesome. I want to thank everyone who was responsible for bringing this together. Tricia Callahan, Heather Johnston, and Lou Haynes were really instrumental in this. We have a volunteer videographer tonight who's also one of our family in the research office and graduate school, so we thank Alan for that. I want to thank the university for letting us try this experiment. I think hopefully you all agree that this was a great event. So now is your time with the speakers. There's plenty of refreshments left. Please help yourself. Take your time, introduce yourselves, and talk to our speakers, and otherwise have a great evening. Thank you. Good, how are you?